So this here is the Vitus e-Mythique, and while it carries the same namesake as the beloved trail bike that was released just last year, it's actually a very different bike. In fact, it looks more like an e-Sommet, but a bit cheaper. This is the base level build, the VR, and it comes in at £3,300, and that is fantastic value for money. But while everything is rather good on this bike, there are a few foibles. So you'll have to keep watching to find out exactly what's happening here. So this is the Vitus e-Mythique LTVR, and there's two very interesting things about this bike that really sets it apart from basically any other e-bike currently on the market. And one of those being is that it runs on a Bafang M510 motor, and that has been kind of crafted in collaboration with Vitus, and Vitus is the first big brand to bring a Bafang motor to an e-mountain bike. So this Bafang motor here is rather special in itself because it offers up 95 Newton meters of torque and up to 400 watts of peak power. And generally that is quite a lot for an e-mountain bike. You know, we're talking Haibike that does upwards of 100, but there's nothing else that really matches this at the moment. Of course, this comes with 5 power modes. So you've got Eco, Eco Plus, Trail, Boost and Race. And as you would expect, they offer different power outputs with different torque rates. So all of these modes offer a full list of features. So of course the lower modes offer a lower output and the higher modes offer a higher output at the expense of battery. But this gets a trail mode, which is very similar to the Bosch e-MTB Plus mode or the Shimano's trail mode. So the bike tapers its output according to what kind of power that you're putting in. But interestingly, on the boost and race modes, it comes with a level of overrun, so it will keep driving the bike after you stop pedaling. On the race, that is a considerable amount of free power, and it's really helpful for getting over routes when you're climbing and things like that. And of course, this is all powered by a 630 watt-hour battery. So even though this is called the e-Mythique, everything about this bike is incredibly similar to the e-Sommet. So it's an enduro-focused bike with 160mm of rear suspension, but at the front of this particular build, you've got 160mm suspension too. On the more expensive builds, you get a 170mm fork. So similarities with the e-Sommet continue because the bike looks almost identical apart from this rocker, which is a little bit different. But this is also a mullet bike, exactly the same as the Spendia bikes we've seen before. And as the e-Mythique gets very similar frames to the e-Sommet, it gets a very similar geometry. But of course that changes a little bit with the 160mm fork. So the angles are generally a little bit steeper, but not by much. So we've got a 64-degree head angle, 68-degree seat tube angle, and then we've got a 483mm reach. That all results in a 1,275mm wheelbase. So if we move on to the spec, and it's all very wisely picked stuff. It might not be anything that'll get you mouth-watering per se, but it's all stuff that works rather well especially for the money. So at the front we have a SR Suntour Zeron fork. That comes with 36mm stanchion, so it should be nice and stiff. And then that is joined by a rear shock from RockShox with the Deluxe R. Shifting is then handled by a Microshift Advent X drivetrain, so that comes with 10 speeds over an 11 to 48 tooth cassette. And then there are a set of Tetro brakes that are matched to 4-pot calipers and 203mm rotors. Then inflated to a set of WTB ST Light i30 rims, which are laced to Vitus' own hubs, are a set of V Tyre Co. Attack HPL tyres. So these look rather aggressive and properly fit for what this bike is designed for. At the front we've got a enduro casing with a very soft compound rubber, and at the rear we've got a much harder compound rubber that should offer longevity on this e-bike platform. And it also comes with a burlier rear carcass, which makes a lot of sense given that this is a heavy little bike. So we've gone over one of the key aspects of the bike, and that is that it runs a Bafang motor. But the second one is that this costs just £3,300. And on the market, there are very few bikes that actually match that price point while being rather good. So if we move on to the all-important ride impressions, this bike actually impressed. Not that it's any surprise that it's built around that e-Sommet kind of chassis, but when it comes to lower priced bikes, you know, sometimes you can kind of have some preconceptions about a bike. But yeah, this one impressed. It worked really well. And I was very surprised with how well the components. But if we go onto this bike's climbing, and it's not flawless, but it's pretty good. There is some bob around the suspension, so you are losing some energy when you're pedaling, but of course it's an e-bike, so that doesn't matter so much. But with the saddle up and when you're pedaling around, it's a really roomy cockpit. And I would say it feels a little bit too big, but then I haven't had my saddle too far forwards on the rails. There's a clear rearward bias on the bike, so when you go up some things that are particularly steep, you do have to weight that front end a little bit more than you usually would. But given the fact that this is an enduro-based e-bike and it's designed to go downhill quickly, that's kind of a given. But generally on the climbs it is very well behaved, and that's where this motor really comes into play. And it delivers power, I'd say, a little bit differently to what you've seen from the more established e-mountain bike brands such as Shimano or Bosch. So for the most part, I've ridden this bike in trail mode because I like how it tapers its output to what you're doing with your legs or the power that you're putting in. But this particular bike or this motor has some kind of input lag. So you'll put in a pedal stroke, you put in a particularly hard one, and it'll take a little bit of a while for it to figure out what's going on and output its power accordingly. So that's really noticeable when you're going up climbs. Of course, no climb is a consistent gradient. And where that climb kind of dips a little bit, the bike gets away from itself a little bit. So it doesn't taper that power in the sense that you don't need all of that power because the climb's gone down a little bit. It kind of feels a bit whiskey throttly. And speaking of whiskey throttle, I have had my moments with this bike, especially when it comes to uphill switchbacks, just because the motor takes learning. It's predictable to a point, but it can throw in a few surprises. So yeah, uphill switchbacks, I've put in a bit of power just to kind of get me up there, and it's just gone for it and kind of sent me into the bank. This is something you can learn and deal with, but it just doesn't have the refinement of more expensive motors, basically. On more techie climbs, it's a lot more manageable, and you can just kind of leave the motor to do its own thing. So where it will kind of pull away from you a little bit, you can manage that, you can expect it. But the real trick up this bike sleeve is that race mode. There isn't a race mode on any motor apart from the Bosch Performance Line race, and you know, this bike gets it, and it's far, far cheaper than any of those bikes. And it's really useful. So when you're going up a straight techie climb, you can power it, power it, power it. And when you get to a section where you can't really pedal, or you don't want to put a pedal down in case you're going to smash it on the route or something, you can just let the bike power you up and it'll do the work for you. It's a cool little feature, that. Another great feature about this motor is that it's rather efficient with its battery. So I've put in upwards of 1,100 feet, mainly going around boost, trail boost and race mode. And I've finished the day with about 4% battery remaining for a full charge. So that's not too bad at all. So budget-friendly performance is what this bike is all about. And with the build kit that Vitus expect, they've kind of hit the nail on the head. So there's not a lot on this bike that I would rush out to change, which I've been really surprised with considering the price of this bike. You know, the brakes work really well. They come with resin pads, so they do fade in the wet, and you know, they can fade with heat a little bit. So perhaps a brake pad change will be something that I'll do quite quickly considering the riding this bike wants to do. But the fork offers its travel with rather smoothly, and it's got a good small bump sensitivity and mid-stroke support. And the Microshift Advent X drivetrain, that's not too bad at all either. It's probably a little bit clunkier than more expensive drivetrains, but it shifts through its gears, and you know, it's worked rather well up until this point. However, there is one thing I would change straight away, and that is unfortunately these V-coat tires, because they're not quite up to the job for more aggressive riding. For your general trail centre stuff, they do the job, but when you start going off-piste or doing more natural trails with a bit more gradient loss, yeah, they do kind of hold the bike back a little bit. They just don't have the bite that you're looking for. So the front tire really struggles to hold an off camber, which can get really nervous, especially when you're going a bit quickly. And the rear especially, that's, I've not been too happy with this tire because the rubber compound's so hard. You can be going down something steep and want to slow down and it won't bite, and it'll just get all squirrely. The rear end will be everywhere, which isn't ideal. So with that in mind, I think Vitus could up the money a little bit, put some better tyres on this bike, and it'll be ready to go straight out of the box. But tyres aside, this is a bike that I've been able to ride like any other, with very few exceptions for the kit. So, you know, it's confident, it's fast, it's easy to ride, and generally it's tons of fun thanks to that formula that is already put down by this bike's bigger brother, the e-sommet. While it's an easy move, perhaps for Vitus, just to stick an old frame on this bike, again, it's a proven formula, it works really well, and it descends fantastically. And it's a bike that uses its mullet wheel set incredibly well. It is a heavy chat, so you know, you can notice that, but because the rear wheel adds like a heft of flickability and a playful character about the bike, it kind of makes up for that lack of weight. But that doesn't mean that this bike is all about agility. Because of its relaxed geometry, it instills plenty of confidence, and it's just a super capable bike. Pointed towards something steep in the front centre, wrestles up loads of support, and the fork works really well, not to just give up all of its travel straight away. And I feel like this is a bike that encompasses e-mountain biking incredibly well, because you can descend it very quickly with all the confidence I've already talked about, but of course it can go uphill rather comfortably too. Again, you do have to worry about some front end lift on steeper sections, but there's nothing to worry about there. It's a solid stepping stone into e-MTB2, both because of its price, but it can offer a fun ride through blue and red trail-centered tracks, but because it's so capable, it's a bike that a rider can easily grow into as their riding improves. Although this bike will definitely appeal to new riders, it's not one that should be shunned by those with more experience under the belts, especially if they're looking for a budget-friendly winter e-MTB. However, they will notice that the rear end of this bike isn't totally communicative. It can feel a little vague, so it doesn't offer much feedback in techie sections, but it does make for a more comfortable ride. They'll just notice the benefit of a tyre change. As I've mentioned before, as for value, this is really very good value for money. There are very few bikes at this price point, but there is one. It comes from Decathlon in the form of the Rock Rider 29-inch e-mountain bike. Fantastic name, we all know. That will cost you £3,000, but there are some key differences. So that gets a Bros motor that's lower output, and it gets a smaller battery capacity, so it won't take you as far as this one potentially could. It also gets X-Fusion suspension, which I don't believe is as well refined as what we've got here. So for the extra £300, this bike is looking like the one to beat. So as I said before, there's very few e-bikes that come even close to this bike's price point. So if you want to look elsewhere or get something a little bit different, you will have to spend more money at the moment. Unfortunately, that is just a fact. So the Vitus e-Mythique is all about performing as much performance as possible for as little money as possible. And I believe that Vitus has done exactly that. Again, it's inexpensive and it rides incredibly well for that money. It comes with its niggles based around the motor and maybe the brake pads and the tyres, but those are all things that could change in time. So the motor especially, that could get a firmware update that might smooth out that power delivery. Of course, you can change your brake pads and you can change your tyres pretty easily. But all in all, while it might not be quite as refined as more expensive bikes, this isn't an expensive bike in comparison. So where it does have its foibles, they can be very easily forgiven given that you're spending £3,300. So that is a full review of the Vitus e-Mythique LTVR. If you'd like to see more reviews just like this, please like and subscribe. And if you'd like to see a full review on this bike in a bit more detail, head over to www.off-road.cc to see the full written review. As always, thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.